In the frozen grey stillness of January 1858, the Baltimore Customs House recorded something or someone it couldn't quite define. No name, no complaint, no departure. A woman arrived, unregistered, unspoken. She returned the next day and the day after that, until something began to change. The young clerk she watched, a mild, meticulous man named Elias M. Graves, started receiving letters. Not from her, from himself, or rather, from cities he had never set foot in bearing his own handwriting. Postmarked with dates that didn't match his travel, his routine, or anything at all. 6 months later, asylum records would list her as his legal ward. Boarding house ledgers listed her as his fiancée, and 2 separate city burial books recorded the same man, Elias M. Greaves, dead and interred in 2 different places on the same day. Both signatures matched. Neither corpse did. Welcome to Sleepy History Tales, where every shadowed corner of the past hides something unfinished. If you're here for the strange, the forgotten, the softly horrifying, consider subscribing. We're close to reaching our very first milestone, 1,000 hulls, curious minds gathering in the dark. You could be the one who tips us over. And if you're listening now, wherever you are, leave a comment with your country and the local time. There's something strangely comforting in knowing how scattered we all are. Yet, how we're listening to the same story unfold together. It was the 3rd Tuesday of January, and snow had gathered thickly along the southern steps of the Customs House. Commerce Street wore a grey veil of frost that softened its usual sharp lines. Even footsteps sounded hesitant in that muffled morning. The portico's marble pillars bore a crust of ice, and near the 3rd column, hunched in a dark wool cloak, sat a woman. She wore soaked gloves, mismatched boots, and when the junior clerk, Elias M. Graves, approached, she didn't speak, she smiled. Graves, 26, had recently transferred from Annapolis after the quiet death of his father, a modest judge with no scandal to his name. The boy was known in files as courteous, diligent, and quietly overgenerous with strangers. Nothing odd, nothing eccentric, except perhaps that habit of volunteering for tasks well above his pay grade. That day, Graves offered her a seat by the eastern vestibule and quietly fetched her tea from a second-floor service usually reserved for ranking officers. The janitor's log later noted she sat perfectly still for 3 hours, watching the foyer, calm, unblinking. No one asked her to leave. The next morning, she returned, and the next, each time arriving before the building opened, each time claiming the same bench, each time fixing her silent gaze on Elias M. Greaves. She never spoke, never interfered. She simply watched. The other clerks began whispering, half mocking, calling her the widow of the staircase. But Greaves never reacted. If anything, he became more precise, more withdrawn, more aligned. There's something that didn't make it into the official reports, but it surfaced later in an unsigned letter left in the building's basement filing room. It said that during her 3rd week of visits, Graves began obsessively rechecking his own ledgers. He claimed entries had shifted, dates inverted, names changed, and most unsettling of all, the handwriting was unmistakably his, but not the thoughts. "It's all my ink," he allegedly told a junior assistant, "but not my thinking." One preserved ledger archived at the Burnham Annex of the National Archives contains marginal notes beside the cargo records of the SS Tilford. Notes in Grievous' exact handwriting, dated 3 days before the invoice was officially submitted. One margin reads, "The window only matters if she's in it." Another more cryptic, "She's correcting me from before." The office confused, assumed fatigue. Someone gently recommended Grievous take a short leave, but no formal action was taken. The woman, after all, had done nothing, filed no complaint, broke no law. In bureaucratic terms, she did not exist. Then came the first note. January 27th. Greaves found a small folded slip of foolscap tucked neatly under his blotter. It was in his handwriting, unmistakable. But he had not written it. It read, "You needn't offer again. I'm already home." No signature, no date. He didn't report it, but 3 days later, the office porter noted that Greaves had quietly rearranged his desk drawers, mirroring the exact layout of the front reception counter, where the woman waited each day. He moved his inkwell to the left, began writing with his offhand. When asked why, he simply said, "The alignment helps." Alignment. With what? The record does not say. By early February, the woman's image had begun appearing in casual pencil sketches drawn by idle clerks. 3 of them survive. Each one captured her more precisely than the last, though no one claimed authorship. In a staff bulletin from that same week, someone had made a faint correction beside Greaves' name. A single line, handwritten in an unfamiliar script. Her handwriting is steadier than mine. The ink didn't match the ledger. No one knew who wrote it. The Baltimore Customs House stood like a judgment cast in stone, its silhouette chiseled into the salt-laced horizon of the harbor. Greek revival in shape, federal in spirit, cold in both. Inside its marble veins and polished mahogany counters formed a labyrinth where civil clerks toiled under the muted hum of clarity lamps. Days blending quietly, purposefully into each other. Among them moved Elias M. Greaves, precise, formal. But if you watched closely, as his co-workers had begun to do, there was something else. Not absence, but a subtle slackening. A stillness, as if part of him was slowly being unhooked from itself. By early March, the woman had become part of the building, not listed on guest rolls, not logged in any hallway memorandum, and yet just as regular as the chiming of the quarter bell. When Elias returned from his midday walks, she would already be there, seated, hands folded, always resting atop the same worn copy of the Baltimore Patriot, and always watching only him. Eventually, the other clerks stopped commenting. Her silence had worked its magic. She became incorporeal, no longer a person, just a habit of the corridor. March 12th. A storm clung to the harbor that morning. Rain, heavy and reluctant, beat against the clear-story windows. According to a local signal station's weather log, visibility dropped to less than 30 yards. It was on this day that Elias first discovered a new anomaly in his private ledger. The book wasn't part of his public record. It was kept in a locked cabinet drawer, discreetly marked Personal, AMG. Only his middle initial was M. There was no A, and no one, not then, not now, could find a pen whose ink matched the letter A on the label. Inside that drawer was an entry for the SS Valam, a vessel not yet docked in Baltimore at the time of writing, but the entry was dated February 26th, 3 weeks earlier, and it included troublingly specific details. Hull damage near the starboard bow, unpaid tariffs from Charleston, a notation. No flag displayed upon arrival. None of this would make sense until March 1st, when the real SS Valam arrived. And the manifest confirmed every one of Elias's details. Word for word, in a written statement to the Civil Maritime Board, Elias explained, "I must have copied it from a memorandum, but I cannot recall from where or from whom. And the handwriting, though certainly mine, appears more confident than I am accustomed to." The phrasing raised quiet concern. A peer review was ordered quietly. No disciplinary framing, just clarification. Several of Elias's ledgers from the previous year were pulled for inspection. 3 more discrepancies surfaced, entries dated before the events occurred. Corrections with no initials. Notes referencing records that had not yet existed. One margin bore the initials EG, written in looping curves, a style utterly unlike Elias's typical angular script. It had none of his rigid economy of motion. And stranger still, these entries were written from the left margin inward, as if someone was writing backward, or at least with the opposite hand. Elias was right-handed, but there were no smudges, no corrections, just long, smooth lines done seemingly in a single, practiced sweep. No other clerk had access. The cabinet key log confirmed Elias as the only person to open the drawer. Ever. And the woman, still there, still watching, still unlisted in any official capacity. Mr. Langdon, the building's porter, remembered her clearly. He called her bookish, said she looked like she belonged in a library, not in a federal port office. But when asked to record her name in an incident log standard policy for loiterers, he left the field blank. The report was later recovered unsigned, but with a faint name penciled in along the margin. Monsieur Griaves. The handwriting wasn't Elias's. A week later, a new intake sheet appeared on his desk. Clean, crisp, filed properly marked with the correct stamp. His name was in the top left corner. The date March 9th. The request transfer to the Office of Lighthouse Appropriations in Philadelphia. Everything about it looked official. It had been reviewed, approved, stamped. But Elias, he had never written it, never submitted anything. Yet the signature at the bottom, unmistakably his, was written in his offhand. Are you still with me? The lines between presence and absence, between knowing and unknowing, they're starting to blur. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and if there's a building in your town, old and quiet, where someone once sat, just watching. We'll continue this strange tale soon, but not all clocks tick forward. It was a damp, reluctant morning in April, the kind where the air feels heavier than it should, and even window panes seem to sweat in silence. Elias M. Graves arrived at the customs house precisely as he always did, 7 minutes before the bell, carrying a pressed envelope beneath his arm, and wearing a pair of gloves he didn't remember buying. His movements had become internalized. That's the word used later by witnesses, as though every gesture required advance permission from something unseen. That morning, 5 letters waited for him. neatly stacked on his desk, but not by any known postal clerk. No one remembered placing them. No one signed for their arrival. Each envelope bore the exact formal spelling of his name: Elias Matthew Greaves. A detail rarely observed even in official correspondence. The paper varied ivory sandslate deep pine, but each envelope was sealed the same way a pressed crescent of wax. Flat, unmarked, no emblem, no crest. The postmarks told a story no ledger could account for. Savannah, April 2nd. Pittsburgh, April 4th. Trenton Mobile, Wilmington, April 6th to 10th. Each dated the day before it arrived. Each perfectly spaced, and each tracing the woman's silent path. Reports later surfaced, scattered and unofficial, of a solitary woman seen at each of those places, not documented, not registered, just glimpsed. A figure in a rain-worn cloak at a train platform. A silhouette in a hospital vestibule. A motionless presence under a church awning. Silent, still, unclaimed. Inside the letters, the handwriting was Elias's. Not similar to his. Exactly his. Same looping descender on the lowercase g. Same compressed capital H. Even the slight rightward slant that crept in when he was tired. Only the ink changed. Some were walnut brown, others a pale, almost shimmering grey one that caught the light but resisted all smudging. The tone, restrained, clerical, almost official. The first letters mentioned mundane things: a missed appointment at the tax inspector's office, a bridge toll discrepancy in Pittsburgh, a list of quieter boarding houses in Baltimore. But by the fourth letter, something had changed. They do not see me the way you did it read. You recognize the part I left inside you. I left it years ago. You've only now begun to feel it shift. The fifth letter had no signature, no address, no punctuation at the end. Just 6 quiet words. You are where I belong. Elias didn't share the letters. Not then. Not with his superiors, not even with those who asked. But a surviving note from a fellow clerk, Mr. Arlen Deem, dated April 14th, observed something peculiar. Elias, he wrote, had grown preoccupied with out-of-state postings despite having no pending assignments. He'd begun scribbling idle notes onto his blotter. Not calculations, not schedules, but one line. Repeated dozens of times in faint pencil. I have already answered her, but not aloud. 2 weeks later, Elias submitted a formal request. He asked that his handwriting sample on file with the civil office be recertified. His reasoning: that unauthorized parties had begun mimicking his script well enough to cause visual confusion. The request was denied, but curiously, the denial was postmarked April 10th. One day before Elias claimed to have submitted the application, the letter bore his exact hand, but no carbon copy of the original application was ever recovered. There's something stranger still. The Wilmington dispatch log, dated around the same time, includes a new name directly beneath Elias's: Miss Greaves. No first name. Just that. Her mailing address, Baltimore. In the remarks field, someone had scrawled a single note: letter returned. Recipient already accounted for. There was no record of who wrote that line. The signature was absent. The handwriting matched neither his nor hers, but the curl of the final period That single deliberate flourish would later be traced to a third hand, found decades afterward in an asylum admission ledger filed under alias none. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the quietly humming machinery of federal documentation, spring moved forward. Ledgers thickened with coastal tariffs. Imports stacked up like rain. But something small at first began to tremble in the margins. A quarterly audit at the Bureau of Weights and Measures turned up minor inconsistencies. Just clerical noise, nothing more. 3 offices, 3 cities. Charleston Customs Depot, Richmond Inspection Office, Baltimore Ledger Bureau. Each reported a few irregularities. Nothing major, but all shared a common thread. One name, Elias M. Griavis. He was never supposed to travel. His assignment was restricted. Baltimore only. His file kept in the 5th District drawer was clear. Fixed post. No transfer. No travel approved. Home address unchanged. Desk occupied daily. And yet, in Charleston, a grain inspection form bore his unmistakable signature. E.M. Griavis, stamped, March 19th. Affixed to a rejected shipment. No voucher, no sign-in. But the signature, once again, was his. Same ink, same pressure, same hand. How far can a person travel without moving? How many places can you be accounted for before the numbers start to disagree? If someone were to write in your hand, across cities, across time, would you still be only one? Let me know what would you do if a letter arrived in your name from a place you've never been in handwriting no one else could have forged. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're not finished. The ink was iron gall. The exact formulation used in official correspondence out of Baltimore, deep, almost brownish, with a distinct acid tang under magnification. The curvature of the capital G was nearly identical to Elias Griavis's known signature, though slightly broader as if written with a more generous hand. Still, it was close enough to pass until the second appearance. The following week in Richmond, a seemingly routine adjustment to dock scale records was submitted. The document bore Elias's name again, this time correctly paired with his federal appointment code. It passed verification by 2 senior clerks who claimed rather confidently that they had spoken with Mr. Greaves in person. They described him as quiet, polite, and wearing thin spectacles only. Elias did not own spectacles, nor had he left Baltimore at all. The handwriting on that Richmond document was disturbingly similar to his, not identical, but uncanny. Experts brought in from the Bureau's handwriting analysis team flagged an inconsistency that would soon become central in the lower loop of the S in Greaves, a slight tremor, as though the signature had been started with one hand, the wrong one, then corrected mid-stroke. An awkward ambidexterity, then came the flood. 5 separate documents appeared in Richmond, Philadelphia, Albany, all bearing his name. All filed within an 11-day span. Elias had logged every one of those days at his Baltimore desk present, punctual, and apparently duplicated. The internal review came quickly. His supervisors, alarmed but cautious, pulled the night watchman's logbook, an informal sheet, but one often more accurate than federal time cards. There it was, 3 morning sign-ins by Elias on March 19th, 22nd, and 28th. All in his usual dark ink, and all with subtly different capital E's. One angular with a sharp serif, one wide and Roman in style. One with a flourish at the top, the kind taught in calligraphy schools. When shown the signatures, Elias didn't panic. He didn't protest. He studied them carefully and said with an odd calm, I think someone is mimicking me. Not forging, mimicking. With disturbing precision. I don't remember writing these. He didn't deny them, only denied remembering. In his formal request for a handwriting review, he admitted to a clouding of clarity in recent weeks. A quiet phrase that sat uneasily with the committee. They concluded, perhaps too diplomatically, that either a dissociative psychological disturbance had begun, or some bureaucratic misfiling had grown so severe that authorship itself was no longer reliably verifiable. But that wasn't the end. A fourth document surfaced weeks later, mailed in error to the Philadelphia Stamp Authority. A standard requisition order unsigned but written in handwriting indistinguishable from Elias's early clerkship samples. At the top, scribbled lightly in pencil, were 3 haunting words: grievous emission everywhere. No one claimed to have written it. No department admitted sending it. But folded inside the envelope, lining as though deliberately hidden, was a torn slip of paper. Elias, when presented with it, did not respond immediately. Then, after a long silence, simply shook his head. The message read, "Do not be startled. I have always been here. If you are still with us, dear listener, take a breath. We're only just beginning. Because the story moves now, backward and sideways in time. In the East Wing of Massachusetts General Hospital, bound in goat leather and dated 1858, a patient log lists a woman admitted in late April. Her name, M. No surname. No occupation. No family noted except one name, carefully inked into the next of kin column. Elias M. Graves, attending physician. Now, clerical errors weren't uncommon, especially with unaccompanied patients showing signs of instability. But this wasn't error. It was precise. Too precise. The entry included Greaves's full name, his birthplace, Annapolis, his age at the time, 26, and most disturbingly, his federal registry number. A number used exclusively by the Baltimore Customs House. Line item 103B. A Boston intake clerk could not have known that. A week later, in Albany, New York, another ledger, this one in the state hospital, listed a new patient, Margaret G. No occupation. Notes read calm, responsive, highly observant. Her admitting officer, Elias M. Greaves. Again, this time, the handwriting bore all the hallmarks of Elias's pen, but lighter. The pressure softer. The letters ever so slightly tilted to the right, a telltale sign of left-hand mimicry. By now, dear viewer, you know where this is going, or rather you feel it. Something was moving under the surface of Graves' life, echoing him, writing him, passing through sealed doors and time-coded ledgers with eerie familiarity. And now, we begin to ask the question no one in the department wanted to put into words. Was Elias Graves being duplicated, or was he beginning to duplicate himself? If you've made it this far, you're part of a small circle that keeps history alive and just a little eerie. We're close to reaching 1,000 subscribers here at Sleepy History Tales, and I'd love for you to join that milestone with us. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe now, but no pressure. You'll know if it's time. Now shall we continue? Elias's official statement was never signed. When confronted by a housing manager, Elias denied ever having a visitor. But in the personal log that was filed the next morning, there was a hand-sketched diagram of the room. The furniture had been rearranged. Elias's bed was pushed against the corner, and the extra bed next to it was marked unused but noted acknowledged. From then on, Clark began referring to her by a series of abbreviated nicknames. The witness, his reflection, the woman in the doorway. The strange thing was, no one could agree on what she looked like. But everyone remembered seeing her hovering near Elias, never leaving, just standing quietly behind. One document stood out from the pile, a daily incident log dated June 2nd, kept by postal clerk M. Levenwright. Brief summary. A package arrived this morning for Mr. Greaves. The signature on the outside matched his own, but the card inside read, "She opens things you dare not." No signature, no postage stamp. The original envelope is still in the Burnham archives. The most unusual feature, the seal had no wax, no glue, no string, just a slight indentation as if pressed shut by a finger. The handwriting on the card, while consistent with Elias's confirmed handwriting, was in the cursive style of legal writing, not personal correspondence. By the end of June, the presence of the unnamed woman had markedly changed Elias. He avoided eye contact, often standing in the doorway as if waiting for someone to give him permission to enter. Every morning he made 2 cups of tea and brought them to his desk, 1 cup always untouched. No one asked. And he never explained. A piece of paper was found, later tucked under Elias's placemat. The ink was faint, the kind that tends to bleed through paper when pressed under a heavy object. It read, "If you don't name her, she will borrow yours." There was no signature, but the handwriting was identical to Elias's, only it was written backwards from right to left. In a small leather book, a lady's dressmaker's ledger, as curled and stained as a teacup, left on a table, one found a remarkable entry. Amid the lines of orders for alterations to petticoats and naval uniforms was a brief entry dated May 29th, 1858. Dress made under the name of Elias Graves, but not to his figure. The shop was on the 2nd floor above a drugstore on the corner of 7th and Harker. The proprietor was Mrs. Adelaide Moore, a widow in her 40s who was considered a skilled seamstress, though the shop barely kept a living. She kept meticulous records not for tax purposes, since the records predated the filing of mandatory records, but because she was accustomed to working alone, always careful. There was a notable line in the ledger, a coat ordered for the gentleman's fiancée, by direct request. Measurements inconsistent. Broad shoulders, narrow hips. Ash grey wool plum silk lining. Not the usual style for women. Made without a label inside. A note attached. The customer said the recipient did not like to be identified. When questioned in a federal investigation, later, Ms. Moore added, "I thought she was some kind of special bride, shy or of an odd shape. But it was only when she tried the coat on that I realized something strange. The coat did not fit her, but fit the man who was with her perfectly. I thought the coat seemed to know him already." The name given at the time of ordering was Miss Greaves. Payment was made in coins. The receipt, which is still available, is signed E.M.G. Givens, a name that does not match any of the aliases associated with Elias or the unknown woman. What do you think of the nameless woman? Was she real? Or was she just a reflection of Elias, a past that none of us are allowed to name? If you're still here, you're probably as fascinated by forgotten stories as we are. So subscribe to Sleepy History Tales. We're fast approaching the 1,000 subscriber mark, and there are more mysteries waiting for you behind the next door. The letter forms themselves told a quiet truth. While unsigned, the handwriting bore unmistakable echoes of Elias Graves, particularly in the tightly curved lowercase e, and the odd offset spacing between initials. These weren't quirks of sloppiness, but the marks of someone trained in the habits of official script. Someone who had once been a trusted scribe for the government. Miss Monai, who had once worked near Elias during his Richmond tenure, later contacted the Bureau of Maritime Clerks in Baltimore after hearing rumors of an investigation into his records. Her letter, now yellowed and tucked among the back pages of the Richmond Historical Society's archive, contains a chilling line. There was no affection between them, but something worse. Something decided. He did not speak to her as one does a bride. He stood beside her like she might answer questions he'd forgotten how to ask. What she meant exactly, no one can be sure. But perhaps more unsettling than her words was the object found decades later in a dusty, mislabeled bin in a Baltimore storage attic. A coat, elegant masculine, still lined in its original plum silk, was marked "Unclaimed Personal Effects." The tailoring was precise, but it was what lay inside that made curators hesitate. Pinned within the interior seam was a note folded tight. It read, "This was made to fit the part of me that answers to her." Curators noted something strange about the paper. It had aged unevenly, and when examined under magnification, the ink revealed not one but two distinct layers. Two compositions of iron gall ink. One had been written faintly beneath the other. The second, the darker, more recent, was the version we can read. The first remains nearly invisible, detectable only through the light scarring of the page, traced as though written, not with a pen, but with the point of a sewing needle. Even more oddly, in the seamstress's own ledger preserved in a separate archive, the coat is never marked as completed. No fee was logged, no delivery noted. Just one torn final line at the bottom of the page, returned but never collected. No charge, no receipt, not mine. And from there, the descent begins. The inquiry into Elias M. Graves was not publicized. Like many federal corrections of its kind, it was not intended as punishment, but preservation, an attempt to quietly intervene before error became scandal. The Bureau of Maritime Operations had reviewed a pattern of irregularities, duplicated signatures, questionable assignments, documents bearing Greaves' name and unmistakable handwriting, but all at odds with official logs and timelines. A small review committee was convened in the Baltimore district in a borrowed room on the 3rd floor of the Customs House. It was a seldom used chamber, lit poorly, lined with fading nautical maps and brass fixtures dimmed by decades of gas smoke. In that murky light beneath warped ceiling beams and dust-covered transoms, Elias was asked to explain himself. The first item placed before him was a personnel transfer approval dated March 11th, authorizing a move to the Richmond office. Greaves swore he'd never seen it before, but the signature was his. Every curve, every pressure point, even the spacing compressed and slightly tilted, was consistent with how his hand had changed after an injury he'd sustained in 1856. The review panel knew about the injury. The pen stroke hesitation on the document matched perfectly. The second item, a ledger routing a parcel from the Albany Asylum to the Baltimore archives. Again, his name appeared twice, once as the authorizing clerk, once as the recipient. The paperwork was intact. No errors, no evidence of forgery. When asked to account for these anomalies, Graves' answer was recorded in full. I know the weight of my own pen, but the thoughts behind it, those were not mine. At first, the committee leaned toward mercy, perhaps fatigue, overwork, a breakdown of routine. His fellow clerks described him as increasingly rigid, methodical to a fault. He had, they said, begun aligning his blotter and inkwell precisely each morning, ensuring the corner of his folio met the edge of the desk at a perfect right angle. When asked why, Greaves had replied quietly, "It prevents bleeding." But when the seventh document surfaced, all assumptions of simple exhaustion fell away. It was a census schedule from the Office of Federal Enumeration, listing Greaves as co-signer for a demographic initiative in Ohio. He insisted he had never been to Ohio, yet his signature was there twice, once in his usual strong hand, and once again directly beneath it. Identical in form but lighter in pressure. The second name, Monsieur Greaves, a name that appears nowhere else. Reviewers noted something deeply troubling. The more recent the document attributed to Elias, the less personal it became. His older memos were lively, full of marginalia, little side comments, flourishes of tone. But these newer documents, cold, clean, robotic. Each was a perfect administrative shell, every field filled, every box checked, but stripped of soul. They weren't forgeries, they were imitations, reductions, as though someone or something was copying not just his signature, but the idea of him. The investigation had stalled. The committee, once eager, now seemed distant, formal, cautious. A motion was quietly filed, a request to review all of Elias Graves' past correspondence, to cross-reference his letters with external dispatches. His desk was opened. What they found was not shocking at first glance, a duplicate ledger nearly empty. But upon closer inspection, faint pencil markings revealed something else. A pattern. One name again and again. Graves Elias M. Graves. A. M. Graves. Unconfirmed. Then, near the bottom, a single line, so faint it could have been missed entirely. I am not misremembering. I am being overwritten. Elias was not fired, but he was quietly removed from independent assignments. Relegated now to verification duties, only measurements, numeric comparisons, standardized tasks that left no room for interpretation. A memorandum circulated internally restricted his access to outbound documentation. It bore no official accusation, no formal reprimand, only a cryptic handwritten note in the margin. Do not let him sign for himself. No one would later admit to writing it. Let's pause there. That phrase, do not let him sign for himself, do you feel it too? The way it seems less like instruction and more like caution. The intake ledger from the Baltimore Asylum for Women, second quarter of 1858, is still held in the state archives. Brown linen binding, copper-edged corners, each page filled with steady mechanical penmanship. Nurses of the time were trained not just in care but in restraint, emotional and physical. Entries follow the rigid pattern of the era date of arrival, medical condition, listed guardian or kin, prior occupation. If there was a diagnosis, it appeared below written in smaller script, sometimes barely legible. Iron gall ink was used, permanent sharp, meant to outlast the paper itself. But turn to page 143 and something happens that no ink of that kind was meant to do. It shifts. The entry in question is dated April 23rd. No name appears where it should. Instead, 2 relationships are listed under legal guardian or assigned custodian ward of E.M. Greaves. 2 lines down, under domestic partner or affiliation, domestic partner of same. Both entries written not by a nurse or physician, but in the same distinctive hand seen in prior notes from the woman herself. She had listed herself formally and in her own writing as both dependent and companion to Elias Greaves. Let that sink in a moment. The very foundations of the record collapse identity custody authority, all converging on a single man who at that point had no recorded knowledge of her whereabouts. According to the asylum staff, the woman was admitted without incident. She arrived alone, carrying a satchel with nothing inside. When asked for her name, she gave only one sentence. He will correct the spelling. Dr. Alton Ray, the attending physician, described her intake as routine, save for a curious margin note in his report. Patient speaks with certainty of being known, but provides no demonstrable evidence. Claims handwriting as proof. Now here's where the trail goes deeper. Greaves was informed of her arrival. How no one seems to know. There's no letter of acknowledgement in the archives, no official visitation slip, no response. And yet, exactly 1 week later, his name appears again. This time in a marginal note written by a nurse. Presence of subject verified by E.M. Greaves. No signature accompanies it. And then, the redaction begins. That same page 143 was altered, varnished. A glossy, uneven coating was brushed directly over the entry. This wasn't the standard strike-through or overwriting common in 19th century corrections. This varnish was different. It didn't yellow with time. It didn't fade. It repelled aging. The ink beneath still floats inside it as though caught in clear resin or sealed beneath ice. In 1932, archivists attempted to identify the material. Their report, dry and clinical, described it as resistant to archival deterioration. But unofficially in staff notes, it was referred to as unsettling. And the strangest part, when the page was photographed for reproduction, the redacted field didn't register. The camera produced a clean blank where the writing should have been. A smudged void. A smear of absence. As if that portion of the ledger simply refused to be remembered. Folded carefully into the back cover of the ledger, sewn in long after the original binding was finished, was a scrap of torn paper. On it, written in a hand consistent with Elias Greaves' later years, was a single sentence. You do not admit someone like her. You accept she was always listed. There is no date on the note, but forensic ink testing, decades later, confirmed the ink matched exactly the varnish used on the redacted entry. Above the Customs House annex, the boarding rooms were simple. 10 in total. Narrow beds, a wash basin, and a desk by a poorly sealed window. The men who lived there were government clerks, modest, quiet, dependable. The kind of men who counted shipments or reviewed port declarations. Men like Greaves, at least the version of him that remained. The rooms in the boarding house above the Customs House were all strangely similar. They contained nothing more than the bare essentials, a narrow bed, a wash basin, a writing desk, under a drafty window. Elias M. Greaves, like many of the other civil servants who lived there, kept no personal belongings in his room until one morning that spring. On June 18th, Mr. Little, the house mailman, brought an envelope to Elias's door. It was unsigned, unsealed, with only a pencil line drawn straight down the middle. Inside was a sheet of drawing paper unlined with frayed corners, and on the paper, 2 faces drawn in ink. The first face, there was no mistaking, it was Elias's sharp eyebrows, narrow jaw, the characteristic pursed lips that he held when he concentrated. This was confirmed by colleagues who later saw the drawing, but the second face, though similar in structure, was softer. The lines were softly drawn, the eyes were wide, the hair curled under a lace cap, and beneath each face, the same handwriting me. One under a male face, one under a female face. What made the archivists shudder was not the drawing, but the date smudged in the lower right corner, March 3rd, 1856, 2 years before the woman first appeared in the file. At the time, Elias was still working in Annapolis. He had never been to Baltimore, never met the woman. But the date was a perfect match for Elias's final stint in Annapolis, a time when his personal diary recorded an unexplained illness. There was no formal medical diagnosis, just a line from Elias's letter to his late father. The doctor says, "My mind is not confused, just too crowded." I don't disagree. The drawing was unsigned, but the brushstrokes, particularly the pressure and slight tremor in the horizontal strokes, bear striking similarities to Elias's handwriting in recent years. Experts disagree. Some say the drawing is too detailed to be his own. Others say it is the product of a psychotic break. When shown the drawing during a mental health check, Elias asked not who had done it, but when. He said only that the woman in the drawing was familiar and was troubled by the symmetry between the 2 portraits. 2 weeks later, a typewritten sheet appeared in his in-tray. No sender, no official stamp. A single sentence typed on canvas, an oddity, since typewriters were not yet in use in the Baltimore office. Identity is not ownership, it is mutual recognition. After that day, according to Mr. Little, Elias stopped looking in the mirror. He turned up his collar even when he was in the house. He removed the mirror from the dressing table, wrapped it in muslin, and hid it under the bed. Not only that, Elias also reversed the arrangement of the items in his room so that it mirrored the layout of the room next door, room 6, which had been vacant since May when another employee left without notice. When questioned, Elias replied simply, "That room is not vacant. She was there when I slept." However, according to the register room, 6 had been locked since May 12th and the key was missing. In the archives, a leather book labeled "Unusual Property" 1858 contained the register at Mrs. Edith Calloway's gentleman's boarding house, kept with unusual precision. Each entry was handwritten in a consistent formula: arrival date room, number guest name, length of stay rate. And on page 32, dated March of that year, was a name that could not have existed at the time. Graves E.M., room 7, paid 3 weeks in advance. The handwriting was still Mrs. Calloway's neat, slanted familiar. But Elias did not officially move to Baltimore until a month later. Room 7 was later assigned to him. But according to the ledger, it was his name that had occupied the room before he arrived. In a deposition many years later, Mrs. Calloway said she came alone with a bag and an envelope with that name on it. Said he would be here later. I thought they were getting married. When shown a photograph of Elias, she confirmed that it was not the woman who had paid the deposit, but that the woman had called herself Miss Greaves and signed as such. She stayed for exactly 3 days, long enough to move things, rearrange the furniture, and leave behind faint traces. A tilted mirror, a cleared and relined wardrobe, a page torn from the guest book not quite erased. When Elias arrived a month later, Mrs. Calloway greeted him as a returning guest. Though he appeared bewildered, she thought he was simply tired from traveling. In a letter dated June 22nd, never sent. Later found folded in the cover of the workbook, Elias wrote, "I was told that the room had been set up for me, but I never saw it. And when I entered, the bed was facing east. The desk was under the left window, just as I had wanted it. But I never mentioned this to anyone. When the room was inspected, more strange details were discovered. In the drawer under the sink, there was a shoe bill dated February 4th with a shoe size that didn't match Elias's, but could have been someone of the same build, just narrower across. The name on the bill read, Graves, for Miss. Worse, on the wall behind the closet was a pencil sketch as if someone had outlined a body. Shoulder to hip, no head. The size suggested a man smaller than Elias. In the floor there were 6 indentations, the marks of a large trunk that had once been there. No one had ever claimed the trunk. The records of the boarding house were re-examined months later during the federal inquest. Among them, a curious detail emerged: the ink used to sign the name Greaves reacted faintly under an iron gall separation treatment. This subtle glow wasn't consistent with inks commonly sold in Maryland at the time. Instead, it matched a rare variant stocked only in a handful of Boston print shops. How that ink ended up in a Baltimore boarding ledger remains unclear. When confronted with the signature, Elias Graves didn't deny its existence. But his reply was stranger still. "I never wrote that entry, but I remember being inside it." Now here's something subtle, almost imperceptible. Just beside the date on the ledger page, someone had drawn a faint pencil loop in the margin. A flourish, a private note, or perhaps just the hesitation of a nervous hand. But if you turn the page around and hold it up to candlelight, something else appears. The loop sharpens into 2 words, "already here." And so we cross into deeper territory. Among the incomplete files salvaged from the Washington Metropolitan Infirmary for nervous complaints, one page remains unfiled. No folder, no case number, no discharge slip. Just a single brittle sheet lightly watermarked on the underside. At the top, printed in all caps where a patient's name should go, are the words, "Patient number 12 Graves M." The report is dated July 1st, 1858. The first half reads like a standard clinical observation. Hallucinations of feminine double. Compulsive mimicry of absent subject. Expressed fear of self-fraud. Refusal to confirm name aloud. Suspected convergence of identity with delusional counterpart. But then the handwriting shifts mid-document. The strokes become tighter, more deliberate, as if the hand holding the pen had changed. The second entry is brief but chilling. Discharge due to over-identification with stalker. Patient may not be originator of symptoms. Pattern resembles parasitic duplication. That phrase, parasitic duplication, does not appear anywhere else in known medical texts from the 19th century. no physician's name is attached. And where the field for final recommendation should be, there's only a long, unsteady dash. When the document was examined decades later, during federal review, archivists noticed something disturbing. Held to the lamplight, the top third of the page reveals a faint, mirrored imprint, as though the page had once been pressed against another, transferring the same text in reverse. The mirrored version preserved every word except one, where the original says stalker. The reverse reads guardian. No copy of this report has ever been located. Now here's where things deepen. At the time this document was allegedly written, Elias Greaves had no formal admission record at the infirmary. His name is absent from the intake books for June. No mention in the daily census logs. No formal treatment note. Yet on July 2nd, the infirmary's supply ledger notes a requisition for 1 wool blanket, 1 bottle of ink, room 3B, assigned to clerk temporary. E.g., the initials match Elias Greaves, but the name clerk temporary doesn't appear in any other document or registry. When asked later, Elias denied ever staying at the facility. He claimed no memory of being admitted, no treatments, nothing. But his personal correspondence, carefully stored in the bureau's own drawers, tells another story. There is a silence. Letters from Elias abruptly stop after June 29th. They do not resume until July 3rd. That gap, the exact span of time implied by the infirmary records. His co-workers noticed changes too. Elias began referring to his actions in the passive voice. It was signed, he told one colleague, not by me, but with me. He redacted his name from prior documents, smudging it over in graphite, then scrawling the words non-confirmed author in the margins. And then, more troubling still, a copy of the July 1st infirmary report appeared unexpectedly in the bureau's internal mailroom, folded neatly in a government-issued envelope. No postmark. No clerk recalled handling it. The handwriting on the front was unrecognizable. The return address bore only a single letter, A. Attached by a rusted paperclip was a torn scrap of notepaper. One line written in pencil. The name is correct. The memory is not. And in the upper left corner, in the faintest graphite, was a number, 13. That number has never appeared in any other document tied to the hospital. The final trace of Elias Greaves is dated July 9th, 1858, his last entry in the Baltimore Employment Ledger. Stamped with the Bureau's insignia, it reads, Leave of absence requested. Reason personal distress. This form is signed. Clearly, in his hand. It is the last uncontested signature known to be his. That evening, under a sky smeared with stormlight and the clatter of wet rails, Elias boarded the midnight mail train from Baltimore, bound for Philadelphia. The weather had turned early. Summer storms slid down the tracks like oil slicking the iron and slowing the night's journey. Conductors remembered him not for his silence, which was expected on such late routes, but for his stillness. Alone without luggage, he responded with only a soft murmur when asked for his ticket. He held no coat and no umbrella despite the rain. Something about him, something unhurried, left an impression. By the time he arrived at the Ledger House Hotel, a modest boarding house tucked just off Market Street, the city clock had tolled past 3:00 in the morning. The desk clerk that night, a certain Mr. Barons, would later testify under federal oath that Mr. Greaves did not check in alone. With him was a woman, a presence, more than a person. quiet in her eyes, her silence not uneasy, but deliberate. She offered no name, yet signed the guest ledger as Monsieur Greaves, the penmanship striking and precise, different from Elias's usual hand. Not quite his, not quite foreign, something in between, like an echo. 12 hours later, Elias was found unconscious in the hotel's vestibule, upright in a velvet-backed chair, hands resting neatly in his lap, as if waiting for someone to return. There were no marks of violence, no signs of struggle. Only a folded note pinned to the breast of his coat with a straight pin and written in handwriting eerily close to his own. It read simply, "Where you go, I go." No signature, no explanation. Staff recollections clashed. One chambermaid swore she had seen Elias leave his room that morning. The same woman beside him, gently placing his coat on his shoulders, her hand brushing the back of his neck, like a mother guiding a child. Another, upon seeing his photograph, shook her head. "That's not the man she came in with," she said. "He looked like him, but he didn't walk like he knew who he was." A third voice, more confident, more unnerving, claimed the woman hadn't been accompanying Elias. She had been leading him. The local constabulary opened an inquiry, but no charges were filed. Elias, upon waking, refused questioning, refused aid, and refused even acknowledgement. When asked directly who the woman was, he gazed past the officer and asked, "Which version of me did she speak to?" There was no official record of any second guest in the room. And yet, both sides of the bed had been disturbed. 2 glasses sat by the bedside, one half-empty one untouched. And above the vanity, the hotel mirror bore more than just morning condensation. A faint trace of initials EMG was visible in the mist. Below them, carved directly into the glass, shallow but unmistakable, the same 3 letters EMG. The hotel held onto that mirror for over a decade, unsure what to do with it, unsure what it meant, until it cracked during renovations in 1904. By then, the original police report had been sealed. Elias Greaves had vanished from all official roles. He returned quietly to Baltimore, unannounced, unaccompanied. His landlady later recalled that he returned barefoot with no coat, no suitcase, only a small brown parcel tucked beneath his arm. Inside a single linen shift. The collar bore an inked name, still wet-looking, the weeks-old Miss Greaves. But the tailor's tag, stitched in the hem, read differently, e.g. embroidered in Elias's own hand. By August of that year, Elias Matthew Greaves was no longer listed among federal agents. He appears instead in the registry of the Baltimore Sanitarium for Nervous Disorders, patient number 72B. The facility, sprawling ivy-laced and built from cold limestone, sat on the southern fringe of the city. It is here, perhaps, that the story should have ended. But it didn't. At this point in the story, if you're still with us, consider subscribing to Sleepy History Tales. We're quietly creeping up on our first 1,000 subscribers, and each one brings us closer to uncovering the next forgotten layer of the past. If you enjoy tales that whisper from hospital corridors and echo down railway tracks, you're exactly where you belong. The entry appears ordinary, neatly penned in iron gall ink on thick laid paper. Standard form, standard date, everything as it should be, except the name of the admitting nurse, M. Greaves, RN. At first glance, it seems a clerical anomaly, perhaps a distant cousin, or a name borrowed during a moment of distress. But when Sister Elodia, head matron of the Baltimore Sanitarium, attempted to verify the record, she discovered something troubling. No such nurse had ever been employed there. No issued uniform. No matching badge number. No personnel file. The surname Greaves appeared nowhere in the staff logbook. And yet, the badge number 31114M, when cross-referenced against federal records, did exist, just not within the asylum. It belonged to an entirely different file, one buried in the Baltimore Department of Vital Records, labeled Maternity Claim, Minor Guardian, Elias M. Greaves, age 11. The file was dated 1843. Elias would have been a child. The document, nearly dissolved from time and moisture, had long been separated from its folder. It included a single form authored by E. Greaves, listed as temporary custodian. The subject infant female, unnamed, no record. The mother's identity was missing. In the margin, written in another hand, beside the space labeled claimed by someone had scrawled, to be recorded under future designation. No identity to be fixed without consent. There's no indication that Elias ever knew of this document. Yet 15 years later, the nurse's signature on his sanitarium commitment papers, Monsieur Greaves, bore unmistakable echoes of the handwriting on that maternity form. Elias arrived at the asylum, lucid but untethered. He claimed to have come with a nurse, the one who had arranged everything. When asked to describe her, he said only, "She remembered me first." He was observed for 7 days. During his stay, nurses noted a pattern. He refused to eat unless a second-place setting was laid before him. He insisted that his medical charts be duplicated, one for himself, one for her, though he never said her name aloud. Each morning began the same way. Elias stood at the window speaking softly to his reflection. Moments later, he would correct the phrasing, whispering in a lower tone, as if rehearsing a line or remembering one. No visitors were recorded, and yet the August 12th visitor log contains an anomaly. 2 entries, both bearing the same last name. Greaves 1 under patient, 1 under guest. The note reads, "Arrival confirmed. Reconciliation not completed. Patient requires reintegration." No staff member recalled writing that note. The pen used a red iron formula, typical of midwifery wards, not psychiatric clinics. No sample of it was ever found elsewhere in the asylum. Elias was discharged on August 15th with a curious recommendation: relocation to a less populated environment. His final note: patient recognizes self in mirror but identifies name as belonging to other. He was returned by cab to his boarding house. The fare receipt was signed not by Elias but by Monsieur Greaves. The cab driver, when interviewed, claimed it was a young woman who gave him the fare and address. Quiet, composed, like a sister, he said, or someone older. But Elias had no siblings, and the signature under magnification revealed something else. It had been traced once forward, once backward along the exact same stroke. Both directions matched Elias's own hand. Only one was visible to the eye. By 1873, the Baltimore sanitarium had begun to modernize. Gaslight replaced kerosene. Cotton smocks replaced linen gowns. The east wing, plagued by mold, was shuttered indefinitely. During renovations, a back vault in the disused records office was cleared to make way for a new annex. On June 14th, janitor Henry Olin unearthed something wedged behind a misaligned stone shelf, a small journal, wrapped in muslin and twine. The cover swollen from age, still intact. E.M. Greaves' visitor log. No such log had ever existed in institutional records. Inside were 37 entries spanning 1858 to 1871, all in the same hand, all ending with the same name, Monsieur Greaves. But these were not observations. They were confirmations. Whispers recorded in ink observed him pacing the corridor again today. He mouths the name before he speaks it. He asked for me in writing, not aloud. He requests silence, but only when others are watching. None of the entries matched Elias's hand directly. And yet, the strokes were his. The capital G, the gentle slant, the terminal loop, they were all there, not forged, but traced. Not copied, but shadowed, like someone writing with him, not as him. The final page contains only a paragraph. No date, no location. It reads, "He never wrote me, but he made room in letters, in mirrors, in spaces between names." The archives remember what the mind declines. After that, the pages end. When reviewed, the journal didn't match any known asylum paper stock. Its material traced to a printer in Albany that served only maternity wards. The ink flowed left to right, but with the fluidity of someone mirroring a movement, not their own. A mimic, a double. The asylum sealed the document, labeled it non-essential in the 1874 audit. Years later, during partial demolition of the East Wing, a stone was dislodged. Behind it, a single sheet of unlined paper, flattened by pressure. No date, no name, just a faint brown sentence. "I was never admitted, but I never left." The ink matched both Elias and the journal. The handwriting matched neither. It didn't appear again until 1931, scrawled in pencil on the underside of a desk drawer in the Customs House Annex, long since converted into a museum archive. Next to it, etched into the wood, McGee. No punctuation, no spacing. Just two names, occupying one space. Some files are never closed. They are simply overwritten by steadier hands, quieter names, and entries no one remembers writing. So tell me, if you found your name in the wrong place, would you erase it or would you wait to see who signs it next? If this story has found you, leave a mark of your own. Like the video, subscribe for more stories that were almost erased, and tell us, where are you watching from? Let's see how far her signature has traveled.